that she currently holds.
Well, I'm glad you acknowledge that, because you made some very demeaning comments about the president that Ms. Patton doesn't agree with. In fact, it has to do with your claim of racism. She says that as a daughter of a man born in Birmingham, Alabama, that there is no way that she would work for an individual who was racist. How do you reconcile the two of those, Mr.
As neither should I, as the son of a Holocaust survivor.
But, Mr. Cohen, I guess what I'm saying is I've talked to the president over 300 times. I've not heard one time a racist comment out of his mouth in private. So how do you reconcile it? Do you have proof of those conversations?
I would ask you to.
Do you have tape recordings of those conversations?
No, sir.
Well, you've taped everybody else. Why wouldn't you have a tape?
That's also not true, sir. That's not true.
You haven't taped anybody?
I have taped individuals.
How many times have you taped individuals?
Maybe 100 times over 10 years.
Is that a low estimate? Because I've heard it's over 200 times.
No, I don't think. I think it's approximately about 100 from what I recall. But I would ask.
So why would
you ask me a question, sir?
Do you have proof? Do you have proof? Yes or no?
I do.
Oh, where's the proof?
Ask Ms. Patton how many people who are black are executives at the Trump Organization. And the answer is zero.
Mr. Cohen, we can
Zero.
go through this. Here's, I would ask unanimous consent that her entire statement be put in the record.
Without objection.
All right, let me go on a little bit further. Did you collect $1.2 million or so from Novartis
I did.
for access to the Trump?
To my viewers, this is fixing to get very, very intense. Listen to the questions and how the answers is presented. It's going to be very intense for the next 30 minutes.
Why did you collect it?
Because they came to me based upon my knowledge of the enigma, Donald Trump, what he thinks.
So they paid you,
sir, please let me finish.
No, did they pay you $1.2 million to give them advice?
Yes, they did. A multi-billion-dollar conglomerate came to me looking for information.
Multi-million-dollar conglomerate.
Unusual here in D.C., looking for information, and they believed that I had a value.
So how many times did you meet with them?
Was the insight that I was capable of offering them.
How many
and
times?
They were willing to pay.
How many times did you meet with them? For $1.2 million, how many times did you meet with them?
I provided them with both in-person as well as telephone access whenever they needed.
How many times? Yes, that's a question, Mr. Cohen.
I don't recall, sir.
So did you ever talk to them?
I spoke to them on several occasions, yes.
How many?
6 times.
6 times. Wow. $200,000 a call.
Sir, I also would like to.
All right,
I also would like to bring to your
This is my 5
attention
minutes,
the
Mr.
contract.
Cohen, not yours. Did you get money from the Bank of Kazakhstan?
It's not a Bank of Kazakhstan. It's called BTA.
BTA Bank, Kazakhstan BTA Bank. Did you get money from them?
I did.
For what purpose?
The purpose was because the former CEO of that bank had absconded with it was between $4 to $6 billion, and some of that money was here in the United States, and they sought my assistance in terms of locating that money and helping them to recollect it.
So are you saying that all the reports that you were paid, in some estimates over $4 million, to have access and understanding of the Trump administration, you're saying that all of that was just paid to you just because you're a nice guy?
Well, I am a nice guy, but more importantly,
I would beg to differ. The record reflects that you're not a nice guy.
Each and every contract contained the clause in my contracts that said, I will not lobby and I do not do government relations work. In fact, Novartis sent me their contract, which stated specifically that they wanted me to lobby, that they wanted me to provide access to government, including the president. That information, that paragraph was crossed out by me, initialed, and written in my own handwriting. It says, I will not lobby or do government relations work.
So Novartis representatives say that it was like they were hiring a non-registered lobbyist, so you disagree with that?
I don't know what they said, sir, but the contract states.
Have you ever contacted anybody in the administration?
Yes.
To advocate on behalf of any aspect of any of your contracts. I ask unanimous consent, Mr. Chairman. I ask unanimous consent.
The gentleman's time has expired. You may answer the question.
I don't know what you're referring to, sir.
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Clay.
Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Cohen, I'm pleased you agreed to testify today voluntarily. In my view, we are all here for just one reason, and that's the American people are tired of being lied to. They have been lied to by President Trump. They've been lied to by the president's children. They have been lied to by the president's legal representatives. And it pains me to say that they have been even lied to by his congressional enablers who are still devoted to perpetuating and protecting this giant con game on the American people. Now, Mr. Cohen, I'd like to talk to you about the president's assets. Since by law, these must be reported accurately on his federal financial disclosure and when he submits them for a bank loan. Mr. Cohen, you served for nearly a decade as then businessman Trump's personal attorney and so-called fixer. Did you also have an understanding of the president's assets and how he valued those items?
Yes.
In November of 2017, Crane's New York Business reported that the Trump organization provided, quote, flagrantly untrue revenue figures going back to at least 2010 to influence Crane's ranking of the largest private companies in New York. According to the reports, while the Trump organization reported nearly $9.5 billion in revenues in 2016, public filings suggested revenues were actually less than 1/10 of that. To your knowledge, did the president or his company ever inflate assets or revenues?
Yes.
And was that done with the president's knowledge or direction?
Everything was done with the knowledge and at the direction of Mr. Trump.
Well, tell us why he would do that and what purpose did it serve?
It depends upon the situation. There were times that I was asked, again with Alan Weisselberg, the CFO, to go back and to speak with an individual from Forbes, because Mr. Trump wanted each year to have his net worth rise on the Forbes wealthiest individuals list. And so what you do is you look at the assets and you try to find an asset that has, say, for example, 40 Wall Street, which is about 1.2 million square feet. Find an asset that is comparable, find the highest price per square foot that's achieved in the area, and apply it to that building. Or if you're going off of your rent roll, you can go by the gross rent roll times a multiple, and you make up the multiple, which is something that he had talked about. It's based upon what he wanted to value the asset at.
You know, you have provided this committee with copies of the president's financial statements or parts of them from 2011, 2012, and 13. And Mr. Chairman, I would like to submit those for the record. Mr. Chairman, I'd like to submit the statements to the record.
That is ordered.
Thank you. Can you explain why you had these financial statements and what you used them for?
So these financial statements were used by me for two purposes. One was discussing with media, whether it was Forbes or other magazines, to demonstrate Mr. Trump's significant net worth. That was one function. Another was when we were dealing later on with insurance companies, we would provide them with these copies so that they would understand that the premium, which is based sometimes upon the individual's capabilities to pay, would be reduced.
And all of this was done at the president's direction and with his knowledge?
Yes, because whatever the numbers would come back to be, we would immediately report it back.
And did this information provided to us inflate the president's assets?
I believe these numbers are inflated.
And of course, inflating assets to win a newspaper poll to boost your ego is not a crime, but to your knowledge, did the president ever provide inflated assets to a bank in order to help him obtain a loan?
But you may answer that question.
These documents and others were provided to Deutsche Bank on one occasion where I was with them in our attempt to obtain money so that we can put a bid on the Buffalo Bills.
Thank you for your answer.
Mr. Heiss of Georgia.
I'd like to yield a second to the gentleman from North Carolina.
I thank the gentleman for yielding. I want to ask unanimous consent to put into the record an article from Stat which indicates that Mr. Cohen's promise to access not just Trump, but also the circle around him. It was almost as if we were hiring a lobbyist, close quote. I ask unanimous consent.
Without objection.
I ask unanimous consent that we put into the record a criminal referral for violating Section 22 U.S.C. Of the statute number 611. I ask unanimous consent that my letter referring Mr. Cohen for violating FARA for illegal lobbying activity be entered into the record.
Without objection, so ordered.
I ask unanimous consent that the first order of business for this committee is for us to look in a bipartisan way at criminal referrals at the next business meeting.
These are not documents. They're objections. They're objections.
So we're objecting to a unanimous consent request? Is that what, Mr. Chairman?
I'll take care of Heiss. Don't worry. Yes.
I will yield back.
All right. Now let me be clear. Mr. Heiss, I'm going to give you your whole 5 minutes. All right.
Thank you, Mr.
In
Chairman.
fairness to you. All right.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
And Mr. Meadows, the chairman made me the ranking member made me aware that I had given a little more time to Ms. Washington Schultz. I was going to let you do that anyway. But I just want the committee to know that because there's so many members, I'm going to be strict on this 5 minutes. All right. All right. Thank you very much. Mr. Heiss, you have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Cohen, you claim that you've lied, but you're not a liar. Just to set the record straight, if you lied, you are a liar by definition. You also said a moment ago that the facts are inaccurate. If they are facts, they are accurate, and that would make you inaccurate. But I'd like to take a moment to, I'd like to know who you consulted with to prepare for today's hearing, Lanny Davis, and who else?
I consulted with my counsel, Lanny Davis, as well as Michael Monaco.
All right. Did you or Michael or Lanny Davis or anyone else cooperate with the Democratic majority to prepare for this hearing?
I'm sorry, say that again, please.
Did you or anyone else on your team cooperate with the Democrat Party in preparing for this hearing?
We've spoken to the party.
Okay. Did you prepare with Chairman Cummings or anyone on your team?
I'm sorry, what do you mean by prepare?
Prepare for this hearing.
Prepare, I prepared with my counsel.
Did you prepare with the Democrat majority or Chairman Cummings?
We spoke with Chairman Cummings and the party.
With Chairman Schiff?
Spoke with Chairman Schiff and his people as well.
Were there any other individuals acting as a liaison for you with the majority party?
I'm sorry, sir. What are you saying?
Did you have a liaison other than these that you've mentioned who were working with the majority to prepare for this hearing?
Yes, we spoke with the various individuals that you just raised, yes.
Tom Steyer, regarding him or any of his representatives, anyone associated with him, is he or any of them paying Lanny Davis to represent you?
Not that I'm aware of.
Who is paying Lanny Davis?
At the present moment, no one.
So he's doing all this work for nothing?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
And I hope so.
I kind of doubt it. But How did Lanny Davis come to represent you? Did he approach you or did you approach him?
I reached out to Lanny Davis at the recommendation of my former counsel over at McDermott, Will, and Emery, who knew Mr. Davis, and Mr.
So you reached out to Mr. Davis?
I did, yes, initially.
Okay, so did you want to testify before Congress or did he urge you to testify here?
I was asked to come here, and I am here, sir, voluntarily, because it's my
You were asked
decision.
by who? My question, did he ask you to come here?
No, sir.
Okay, because he says that he did ask you to come here and that he convinced you, and also that he did the same with Chairman Cummings as well. So your testimony here is that you approached Lanny Davis to represent you and to come here. He did not persuade you to come here.
He did not persuade me. Actually, Chairman Cummings, which is part of the conversations that we engaged in with his people, as well as Chairman Schiff and others, we spoke in order to ask me to come here voluntarily.
I find the connecting of the dots here with Mr. Davis and you, and frankly the chairman and perhaps others, to be rather stunning that there is an agenda for all this happening here today. And I believe, frankly, that that's to bring the president down, to impugn the president. You made an oath last time you were here, and that oath meant nothing to you then. We had an oath here in this very room about a month ago, and it was, quote, "Be clear that I will seek the truth, nothing but the truth, so help me God," end quote. That sounds like an oath to me. The chairman made that statement in this very room last month. But here we are today, our first big hearing with, as you and we all know, a convicted liar, lying to Congress, a criminal. And I believe this witness is totally incompatible with the stated goal of having to seek the truth in this hearing. This is the first time in the history of Congress we have someone testifying here who has already been convicted of lying to Congress. So congratulations for being the first in Congress to do that, and Mr. Cummings as well. I can't believe we have brought this committee to its knees in terms of losing its credibility. And it's a shameful mockery of what our purpose is. I yield back.
Gentleman's time has expired. Mr. Lynch.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let me just pick up on those last comments. I want to talk about a low point. How about Mr. Papadopoulos pled guilty, Mr. Manafort convicted, pled guilty to 2 other charges, Mr. Gates pled guilty, Mr. Flynn pled guilty, Mr. Pinedo pled guilty, Mr. Van der Zwaan pled guilty, Mr. Kalimnik indicted for obstruction of justice. And for 2 years, you want to talk about an agenda, my friends on the other side of the aisle refused to bring any of these people up before the committee. So today, for the first day, we have one witness who voluntarily is coming forward to testify. Your side ran away from the truth, and we're trying to bring it to the American people. So, Mr. Cohen,
Sir.
first of all, thank you for voluntarily coming before the committee to testify. I want to ask you about your statements regarding Trump Tower in Moscow, and I want to drill down some of the facts and details. Now, you may not be aware of it, but this goes back a ways. Back in 1987, Mr. Trump wrote that he had had ongoing discussions with Soviet officials back then to build a large luxury hotel across from the Kremlin in partnership with the Soviet Union. So at that time, it was the Soviet Union. I want to ask you, in your filing with the special counsel Mueller's office, the prosecutors wrote, and I quote, "Mr. Cohen discussed the status and progress of the Moscow project with individual one on more than the 3 occasions Mr. Cohen claimed to the committee, and he briefed family members of individual one with the company about the project." I know this is redundant, but Mr. Cohen, who are we referring to here when we refer to individual one?
Donald J. Trump.
Okay, and the company?
The Trump Organization,
Okay.
through
who-
through a subsidiary.
Okay. And who were the family members that you briefed on the Trump Tower Moscow project?
Don Trump Jr. and Ivanka Trump.
Okay. Now, were these in the regular course of business, or did the president or family request the briefings?
This is the regular course of business.
Do you recall, there's a question on the number of briefings. Do you recall how many there might have been?
I'm sorry, sir?
Do you recall how many of these briefings there might have been?
Approximately 10
Okay.
in total.
All right. In your written remarks, you also wrote, and I quote, "There were at least a half dozen times between the Iowa caucus in January 2016 and the end of June when Mr. Trump would ask me, 'How's it going in Russia?' referring to the Russia Moscow Tower project. Now, how did the president communicate those questions to you? Was it verbally or over the phone?"
Verbally, most of the time, virtually all of the time, it would say, he would say to me, "Michael, come walk with me." He was heading to, let's say, a rally, to a car, and as I would walk him to the elevator, he would ask me questions quickly regarding a series of
Could there be any
issues.
doubt about what he was referring to in terms of the project in Russia?
No, this would be it.
Okay.
Otherwise, there would have been no reason to ask it of me.
Right, right. You also wrote, and I quote, "To be clear, Mr. Trump knew of and directed the Trump-Moscow negotiations throughout the campaign and lied about it," close quote. How did the president actually direct the negotiations?
After
What details did he direct?
Well, after each communication that I had, I would report back to him, and our goal was to get this project. We were interested in building what would have been the largest building in all of Europe. You know, sir, just if I can say one last
Please,
thing
go
in
ahead.
regard to the gentleman's statement, since this is on topic. The lies that I told to Congress, in fairness, benefited Mr. Trump. It was in furtherance of my protection of Mr. Trump, which I stated in my testimony. And I am not protecting Mr. Trump anymore. And so, while I truly appreciate taking some of your time onto it, to attack me every single time about taxes, I have no credibility. It's for exactly that reason that I spent the last week searching boxes in order to find the information that I did, so that you don't have to take my word for it. I don't want you to. I want you to look at the documents,
Mr. Cohen.
and I want you to make your own decision.
I need my last time.
Sorry, sir.
That's okay. Let me just say, I don't think my colleagues on the other side of the aisle are afraid that you're going to lie. I think they're afraid you're going to tell the truth.
Thank you, sir.
I yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you very much, Mr. Go, sir.
The gentleman from Ohio is recognized.
Oh, I appreciate the gentleman for yielding. I just want to respond to Mr. Lynch. I want you to think about this. When have you ever seen a federal agency where this has happened? James Comey, director, fired. Andy McCabe, deputy director, fired. Lied 3 times under oath, under investigation, right as we speak. Jim Baker, FBI counsel, demoted, then left, currently under investigation by the U.S. Attorney's Office in Connecticut. Lisa Page, demoted, then left. Peter Strzok, deputy head of counterintelligence, demoted, then fired. That's what happened. That's what we're concerned about. And today we actually asked for Rod Rosenstein. Oh, by the way, we now know 3 people have told us Rod Rosenstein actually was contemplating using the 25th Amendment to remove the guy from presidency who the American people put there. And we asked for him to be a witness today, and the chairman said no. And instead we get 30 minutes from a guy who's going to prison in 2 months for lying to Congress. Mr. Cohen, I got 2 quick questions before I yield back to my colleague. Mr. Heiss asked you who all you've talked to. You said you spoke to Mr. Schiff. Obviously, you spoke to Mr. Cummings. You're going in front of both committees. You're here today. You're going to be in front of Mr. Schiff's committee tomorrow. Have you spoken to Chairman Nadler or anyone on his staff, or have any of your attorneys spoken to Chairman Nadler?
I don't know about my attorneys. I have not spoken to.
You don't know if your attorneys have
Congressman. I have not spoken to Congressman Nadler, and
You
I'm
think-
not aware, sir. I'm not aware if my attorneys. I can ask them.
Can turn around and ask you.
The answer, sir, is no.
Okay. And you said at this present time, Mr. Davis is not getting paid. Does that are you anticipating him receiving some kind of compensation in the future?
When I start to earn a living,
He's going to wait 3 years?
The
Wow.
answer is yes.
That's a first. I've never known a lawyer wait 3 years to get paid.
I guess he thinks it's important.
All right. With that, I yield to the gentleman from Arizona.
Well, thank you. Mr. Cohen, you know, you're a disgraced lawyer. I mean, you've been disbarred. And so I'm sure you remember, well, maybe you don't remember, duty of loyalty, duty of confidentiality, attorney-client privilege. I think the gentleman over your right side actually understands that very, very well and wouldn't do what you are doing here today. So let's go back at this credibility. You want us to make sure that we think of you as a real philanthropic icon, that you're about justice, that you're the person that somebody would call at 3 o'clock in the morning. No, they wouldn't. Not at all. You saw Mr. Comer dissect you. Right in front of this committee, you conflicted your testimony, sir. You're a pathological liar. You don't know truth from falsehood.
Sir, I'm sorry. Are you referring to me or the president?
Hey, this is my time.
Are you referring to me, sir, or the president?
When I ask you a question,
Yes.
I'll ask for an answer.
Sure.
Now, are you familiar with Rule 35 of the Federal Rules and Criminal Procedures?
I am now.
Oh. So the committee understands that you've been in contact with the Southern District of New York. Is that true?
I am in constant contact with the Southern District of New York regarding ongoing investigations.
And part of that application is to reduce sentencing time, is it not? Yes.
There is a possibility.
Yes. The answer is yes.
No, it's not, sir.
Yes, it is.
Okay.
It
It's
is.
not.
And so testimony here could actually help you out in getting your sentence lessened. Isn't that true?
I'm not really sure how my appearance here today is providing substantial information that the Southern District can use for the creation of a case. Now, if there is something that this group can do for me, I would gladly welcome it.
Well, I got to tell you, you know, America's watching you. I've been getting texts right and left saying, how can anybody listen to this pathological person? He's got a problem. He doesn't know fact from fiction. And that's what's sad here, is that you didn't do this for Donald Trump, to protect Donald Trump. You did it for you. This is all about you. This is all about this Twitter feed and let me read one of those. Another one. Women who love and support Michael Cohen, strong, pit bull, sex symbol, no nonsense, business oriented, and ready to make a difference.
1,000 followers.
Ready to make a difference against the law. That's pretty sad. You know, over and over again, you know, we want to have trust. It's built on the premise that we're truthful, that we come forward. But there's no truth with you whatsoever. That's why that's important to you, to look up here and look at the old adage that our moms taught us. Liar, liar, pants on fire. No one should ever listen to you and give you credibility. It's sad. It's sad that we have come. In fact, I want to quote the chairman's very words. This is a real, hold on. Sad state.
Mr. Cooper.
Mr. Cohen, several times in your testimony, you state the bad things that you did for Mr. Trump. And at some point, you apparently changed your course of action. There's a recurring refrain in your testimony that says, and yet I continued to work for him. But at some point you changed. What was the breaking point at which you decided to start telling the truth?
There are several factors. Helsinki, Charlottesville, watching the daily destruction of our civility to one another, putting up silly things like this.
Oh, that's silly.
Really unbecoming of Congress. It's that sort of behavior that I'm responsible for. I'm responsible for your silliness because I did the same thing that you're doing now for 10 years. I protected Mr. Trump for 10 years. And the fact that you pull up a news article that has no value to it, and you want to use that as the premise for discrediting me, that I'm not the person that people called at 3 o'clock in the morning, would make you inaccurate. In actuality, would make you a liar, which puts you into the same position that I am in. And I can only warn people, the more people that follow Mr. Trump, as I did blindly, are going to suffer the same consequences that I'm suffering.
What warning would you give young people who are tempted, as you were? Would you encourage them not to wait 10 years to see the light? What advice would you give young people, in particular young lawyers, so they do not abuse their bar license as you did?
Look at what's happened to me. I had a wonderful life. I have a beautiful wife. I have 2 amazing children. I achieved financial success by the age of 39. I didn't go to work for Mr. Trump because I had to. I went to work for him because I wanted to. And I've lost it all. So if I'm not a picture perfect, that's the picture that should be up there. If I'm not a picture perfect example of what not to do, that's the example that I'm trying to set for my children. You make mistakes in life, and I've owned them, and I've taken responsibility for them. And I'm paying a huge price, as is my family. So if that in and of itself isn't enough to dissuade somebody from acting in the callous manner that I did, I'm not sure that that person has any chance, very much like I'm in right now.
A recurring theme in your testimony is concern for your family's safety. What specifically are you most concerned about?
Well, the president, unlike my Cohen for Trump that has 1,000 followers, he's got over 60 million people. And when Mr. Trump turned around early in the campaign and said, I can shoot somebody on Fifth Avenue and get away with it, I want to be very clear. He's not joking. He's telling you the truth. He said, you don't know him. I do. I sat next to this man for 10 years, and I watched his back. I'm the one who started the campaign, and I'm the one who continued in 2015 to promote him. And so many things I thought that he can do that are just great. And he can, and he is doing things that are great. But this destruction of our civility to one another is just, it's out of control. And when he goes on Twitter and he starts bringing in my in-laws, my parents, my wife, what does he think is going to happen? He's sending out the same message that he can do whatever he wants. This is his country. He's becoming an autocrat. And hopefully something bad will happen to me and my children and my wife so that I will not be here and testify. That's what his hope was. It was to intimidate me. And again, I thanked everybody who joined and said that this is just not right.
Have you ever seen Mr. Trump personally threaten people with physical harm?
No. He would use others.
He would hire other people to do that?
I'm not so sure that he had to hire them. They were already working there. Everybody's job at the Trump Organization is to protect Mr. Trump. Every day, most of us knew we were coming in and we were going to lie for him on something. And that became the norm. And that's exactly what's happening right now in this country. And it's exactly what's happening here in government, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My time has expired.
Mr. Armstrong.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, can we take a break?
Okay. All right.
I did, sir. That's okay. Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Cummings might be able to say something that we could hear in this hearing with Michael Cohen, but we couldn't. His mic apparently not on, but we do know that Michael Cohen, the former president's personal attorney, has asked for a short break. And as that happens, we remind you that you're watching it live as sparks fly on Capitol Hill as Michael Cohen sits before the House Oversight Committee. He's making explosive allegations against the president and facing strong pushback from Republicans over his credibility after being convicted of lying to Congress, among other things. Michael Cohen's testimony is expected to resume as soon as they come back in the room. First, though, here are some of the dramatic moments already today from the hearing.
I am ashamed because I know what Mr. Trump is. He is a racist, he is a con man, and he is a cheat.
How on earth is this witness credible? With all the lies and deception, the self-serving fraud, it begs the question, what is the majority party doing here?
We will not tolerate lying to this Congress by anybody. We're in search of the truth. Do you understand that?
I do.
Mr. Cohen, you called Donald Trump a cheat in your opening testimony. What would you call yourself?
A fool.
The law sees him as a criminal liar. I want to bring in anchor of Fox News Sunday, Chris Wallace. Chris, watching this today, what is the greatest headline that you see so far?
Well, this is a man who was inside the Trump organization, and obviously, we have said, he, in his opening statement, called him a racist, a con man, and a cheat, and he has some specific evidence. He talks about him discussing hush money payments in the Oval Office as president. He has a copy of a check that the Trump organization has indicated was supposed to be part of a retainer. Cohen says there was no retainer, and this was reimbursing him for the hush money payments to Stormy Daniels. Obviously, the Republicans on their side have roughed him up, and there's a lot to rough him up about. He is a convicted liar. He is a convicted felon who lied to banks, lied to federal authorities, lied to Congress. I actually think some of the most powerful parts of his testimony today, and I'm not sure how many minds it's going to change. There obviously, if you like Donald Trump, you're horrified that he's even speaking, particularly as the president is in Vietnam dealing with North Korea. If you don't like Donald Trump, I suppose this is catnip. I thought some of the most powerful moments were actually not about facts. They were basically statements, uncorroborated, but statements from Michael Cohen. Debbie Wasserman Schultz asked him whether she thought he was capable of colluding with the Russians. He says he has no hard evidence of that. He does have some circumstantial evidence that the president knew about the Trump Tower meeting in 2016. And Michael Cohen said yes. He said he's capable of doing anything and working with anyone to win. I also thought it was pretty powerful at the very end there when he was talking with one of the Democratic congressmen and basically said to the GOP members who've been cutting him up, you are doing today exactly what I did for 10 years, which is protecting Donald Trump without any regard for the truth. Again, if you like Donald Trump, I think you're going to be horrified that Congress has called him as a witness, especially when the president is in Vietnam meeting with Kim Jong-un. If you don't like Donald Trump, you're going to think, finally, we're hearing some of the truth.
Chris, this is Melissa Francis. Quick question. So he brought some evidence with him, although he has been convicted of forging documents, but he brought with him the bank checks that he was given, some copies of financial statements, some copies of threatening letters that he himself wrote on President Trump's behalf. What did we learn today so far that's new, that we hadn't seen before, known about before?
Well, I'm trying to think. We didn't know before that, and again, this is uncorroborated, but he said he was in the office with Donald Trump, private citizen candidate, in 2016 when Roger Stone called, and it was on a speakerphone, and Roger Stone said, before the WikiLeaks dump of the DNC emails, we know that these WikiLeaks emails are going to come out, and Donald Trump said that that was great. Again, it's his word, and Roger Stone has come out with a statement, also somebody who's accused of lying and denying it. I'm not sure we knew before today about this check that was written during the time that President Trump was president to Michael Cohen for $35,000, which he says is for reimbursement for the hush money payment to Stormy Daniels. And we also have this again, his word, but his statement that in June of 2016, that he was in the room in Trump's office at the Trump Tower when Donald Jr. came and whispered something about the meeting is set up, and that the president said, good, let me know what happens. And he surmises, he doesn't say he knew for sure, but he surmises that was the Trump Tower meeting between Don Jr. and some other top people in the Trump campaign. and that Russian lawyer who had close ties with the Kremlin.
You know, Chris, you talk about the suspicions, the surmising by Michael Cohen. How does it get us any closer to the truth? You saw Ranking Member Jim Jordan go after the fact that there was bank fraud and so much in his background that happened before he was working for Donald Trump and had nothing to do with Donald Trump and how much of a history of lying and crimes that there were. Does any of that discredit a man who then doesn't have proof of Russia collusion, doesn't have proof of the Tower meeting, but has suspicions or strong feelings?
Sure. Obviously, his record is, is terrible. I mean, he is a convicted liar, and he's going to prison in a couple of months for that. And obviously, you expected, and the Republicans were, well within their rights to bring all of that up. It obviously goes to the credibility of this person. He was asked about that several times,
yes.
And he said, "How do you know?" And he said, interestingly enough, he said, "Well, the special counsel may know about that, and so we'll have to see." I will say this, that there are other people who he talks about. For instance, when he talks about the hush money payment, he is in that meeting, he says that he was there with the chief financial officer of the Trump Organization, Alan Weisselberg, who we know has also testified before the special counsel. So if Weisselberg sits there and says, yes, President Trump okayed paying this hush money payment, which would be a campaign finance violation, and he backs up, and we don't know, that's a big if, but if he backs up what Cohen says, then obviously it has added credibility.
Chris Marie Harf here. I have a question actually based off of something you just said, and that's whether we might see testimony from some of these other people that Michael Cohen has been referring to today. At one point, a Democrat actually asked him, are there other people that we should call before this committee? And he gave a whole list of people, including David Pecker from AMI, Alan Weisselberger, and others. Do you think that will be one of the consequences of this hearing today?
Well, it'll be interesting to see. The House Oversight Committee has specifically said they're not getting into, although they touched on it a bit today, into the Russia investigation. That is more the purview and under the jurisdiction of the House Intelligence Committee. But I agree with you. I thought it was very interesting when one of those Democratic members talked about, who else would you suggest we talk to? And he mentioned Alan Garten, who is a lawyer for the Trump Organization, Alan Weisselberg, who is the chief financial officer, and also members of the family. And it'll be interesting to see, because this is the area, this is the lane that Elijah Cummings, chairman of House Oversight, has talked about that he's going to own, he's going to occupy here. And so this is the first testimony on this whole question of what President Trump did in his business dealings and things like campaign finance violations, but it may not be the last hearing.
All right, Chris Wallace, please stand by. We are in a break right now with the hearing of Michael Cohen, the president's former attorney, testifying today. And Brett Baer is alongside as well, Fox News chief political anchor and anchor of Special Report. He joins me now live from Vietnam, where President Trump is holding his second summit with North Korean dictator Kim Jong-un. And Brett, on any other given day, this would be soaking up the screen, and it has to be odd to have the president so far away as this is playing out.
The juxtaposition, Harris, is pretty amazing. Here in Hanoi, just hours away from a big meeting on a geopolitical front that deals with nuclear weapons and the denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula, possibly, and all eyes transfixed on Capitol Hill, including eyes here in Hanoi, watching the president's former attorney with all that he's testified to. I agree with what Chris said about some of the key moments. I do think that there were a couple of other interesting points. One, that Michael Cohen basically blasted that BuzzFeed story saying that Donald Trump told him explicitly to lie about the Trump Tower and the Moscow building to Congress. He said, no, that's not how we operated. That's not what happened. So we get at least what Cohen says under oath now about that story that was floating around for a long time. You also hear from his original opening statement, Harris, that in Cohen's mind, Mr. Trump, now President Trump, never expected to win the presidency, didn't want to win the presidency. It was all about marketing his brand, and he didn't think he had a chance in the primary or in the general election. Interesting juxtaposition now that
the allegation is that that campaign worked feverishly with Russia to try to get across the finish line. So there were some contradictions throughout the testimony, but overall, I think you saw both sides laying markers, saying this guy can't be trusted, he has no credibility, and the other side saying we need to hear from all people that you all didn't let us hear from.
Hi, Brett. Katie Pavlich here. What do you think the political implications of today's hearing are going to be? Michael Cohen says he's testifying because he wants the American people to hear from him about what the truth is, and they will decide what they think it is. Clearly, this is the last thing the president wants while he's in Vietnam, where you are. What do you think the response is going to be politically on Capitol Hill and also with voters?
Well, first of all, I think there'll probably be some response from the president. He has tweeted out before about Michael Cohen being a liar, and I expect you'll probably see some more of that. As far as the political implications, I think it really is the Democrats who will take any bones that come out of this testimony and run with them for their investigations.
Hey, Brett, would you allow me just to dip in for a second? Because we're seeing Michael Cohen walk back into the hearing now, and we saw Jim Jordan seated, we saw Chairman Elijah Cummings seated, and we could just be seconds away from this resuming. This was originally supposed to be a short break that was requested by Michael Cohen. There was a microphone not on, so we couldn't hear Cummings' exact response to that, but then he ordered, yes, we'll take a break. And you see there Michael Cohen taking his seat. Brett Baer, I know you are a world away, and we will bring you back in if this suddenly starts. The microphones are up now, but they have not begun, so I want to give you an opportunity to finish your thought.
Sure. I was just going to say the big enchilada is the Mueller report, which we're waiting on, and we don't know when it's going to come out. Told probably next week, but we've been told that before. So I think people are waiting to see what's in that, and these other investigations will continue and go on. Michael Cohen will probably be tapped for some of these other testimonies. We know he gave closed-door testimony to the Senate Intelligence Committee yesterday, and he, in his testimony, said that he talked to Adam Schiff as well.
Ms. Fox.
Brett Baer, thank you so much. We are gaveled back in. Let's watch.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Cohen, you have admitted to lying on your taxes. According to federal prosecutors in the Southern District of New York, you also lied to banks to get loans. The prosecutors wrote, quote, to secure loans, Cohen falsely understated the amount of debt he was carrying and omitted information from his personal financial statements to induce a bank to lend based on incomplete information, end quote. Is that correct?
That's correct.
You lied on financial documents. So you lied to financial institutions in order to secure loans. So we've established that you lie on your taxes, you lie to banks, and you have been convicted of lying to Congress. It seems to me that there's not much that you won't lie about when you stand to gain from it. In fact, the prosecutors for the Southern District of New York noted that each of your crimes, quote, bear a common sense of characteristics which each involving deception and being motivated by your personal greed and ambition. Is your appearance here today motivated by your desire to remain in the spotlight for your personal benefit?
No, ma'am.
You have sought out ways to rehabilitate your image, from tax evader, bank swindler, and all-around liar to an honorable, truthful man by appearing before cable news. I'm concerned you could be using your story and this congressional platform for your personal benefit, such as a desire to make money from book deals. So can you commit under oath that you have not and will not pursue a book or movie deal based on your experiences working for the president?
No.
You cannot commit to making money off of a book or movie deal based on your work?
No. There's two parts to your question. The first part of your question, you asked me whether or not I had spoken to people regarding a possible book deal. And I have. And I've spoken to people who've sought me out regarding a movie deal.
No, I didn't ask you if you'd
That was
spoken
the
to
first part of the
anybody. I
question.
said, can you commit under oath that you will not, that you have not and will not pursue a book deal?
And I would not do that, no.
Okay. Can you commit under oath that you will not pursue opportunities to provide commentary for a major news network based on your experiences working for the president?
No.
Can you commit under oath that you will not pursue political office in the state of New York?
No.
So you don't commit to changing your ways, basically, because you want to continue to use your background as a liar, a cheater, a convicted liar to make money. That's what you want to do.
And that's going to get me a book deal and a movie deal and television and a spot on television? I don't think so.
Well, it appears that it will. I yield my time, remainder of my time, Mr. Chairman, to Mr.
I thank the gentlelady for yielding. Mr. Cohen, in your sentencing statement to the court in December of last year, you said, "I want to apologize to the people of the United States. You deserve to know the truth." Approximately a month later, BuzzFeed News ran a story that was the story in the country for a couple days. BuzzFeed story ran January 17th, 2019. On January 18th, your counsel went on TV and wouldn't confirm or deny the story. The next day, the special counsel's office did something that's never happened. Never happened. They said the description of specific statements to the special counsel's office and the characterization of documents and testimony obtained by this office regarding Michael Cohen's congressional testimony are not accurate. Why didn't your lawyer, the day that he's on TV, when this story is the biggest thing in the news in the country, why didn't he deny the BuzzFeed story?
Because I didn't think it was his responsibility to do that. We are not the fact checkers for BuzzFeed.
He's on TV to talk about the very story you committed to the court when you were trying to get your sentence reduced, that the American people deserve to know the truth. You had the golden opportunity to give them the truth on a false story, the BuzzFeed story, and your lawyer didn't say a thing. He said this: "I can't confirm, I can't deny." You had an opportunity to do exactly what you told the judge you were going to do 1 month after you said it, and you didn't do it. Why not?
Again, it wasn't our responsibility to be the fact checker for the news agencies.
This is the biggest story in the country.
Please let me finish. The president says so far approximately 9,000.
Finish. I got 8 seconds. I got 8 seconds. I'll let you finish.
Chairman, may I please?
The special counsel
Chairman, can I please finish?
Something they've never done. They said that story was false. Now you can respond.
Okay. My response. The president has told something over 9,000 lies to date. Do I ask Mr. Davis or Mr. Monaco, or do I go on television in order to correct his mistakes?
When Mr. Davis goes on to talk
the answer
about
is
that
no.
specific subject,
The answer is no. And I would like to...
Gentleman's time has... Listen up. The gentleman's time has expired. You may finish answering the question, and then we're going to go to Mr. Connolly.
All I wanted to say is I just find it interesting, sir, that between yourself and your colleagues, that not one question so far since I'm here has been asked about President Trump. That's actually why I thought I was coming today. Not to confess the mistakes that I've made. I've already done that. And I'll do it again every time you ask me about taxes or mistakes. Yes, I made my mistakes. I'll say it now again. And I'm going to pay the ultimate price. But I'm not here today, and the American people don't care about my taxes. They want to know what it is that I know about Mr. Trump. And not one question so far has been asked about Mr. Trump.
Mr. Connolly.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, Mr. Cohen, based on your testimony and your 10-year experience, I think you can recognize the behavior you're being subjected to on the other side of the aisle. Discredit, slander, use any trick in the book to prevent your testimony from sticking. The idea that a witness would come to us who's flawed, and you certainly are flawed, means they can never tell the truth, and there is no validity whatsoever to a single word they say, would discredit every single criminal trial of organized crime in the history of the United States, because all of them depend on someone who's turned. It would make RICO null and void. We couldn't use it anymore. This Congress historically has relied on all kinds of shady figures who turned. One of the most famous who led to the decapitation of the organized crime families in America, Joe Valachi, congressional hearing. He was a witness.
And he committed a lot worse crimes than you're convicted of, Mr. Cohen. So don't be fooled by what my friends on the other side of the aisle are trying to do today. It is do everything but focus on the principle, known as individual number one in the Southern District of New York, as I recall. Is that correct, Mr. Cohen?
That is correct.
Now, Mr. Cohen, I want to ask you about something that's not in your testimony and that so far has not been made public. In our committee staff search of documents provided by the White House that were otherwise redacted or already in the public, and I guess the White House thought that was funny, they made one mistake, the White House. There was an email from a special assistant to the president
Amen.
to a deputy White House counsel, and the email is dated May 16th, 2017, and it says, and I quote, POTUS, meaning the president, requested a meeting on Thursday with Michael Cohen and Jay Sekulow. Any idea what this might be about? End quote. Do you recall being asked to come to the White House on or around that time? With Mr. Sekulow? May of 2017.
Off the top of my head, sir, I don't. I recall being in the White House with Jay Sekulow, and it was in regard to the documents, the document production, as well as my appearance before the House Select Intel. But I'm not sure if that's specifically different. But what I will do is I will check all my records, and I'm more than happy to provide you with any documentation or a response to this question.
Well, that's you sort of touch on presumably the purpose of the discussion, at least among others. This meeting occurred just before your testimony before the Select Committee on Intelligence here in the House. Is that correct?
I believe so, yes.
Was that a topic of conversation with the president himself?
If this is the specific instance that I was there with Mr. Sekulow, yes.
So you had a conversation with the President of the United States about your impending testimony before the House Intelligence Committee. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Good.
What was the nature of that conversation?
He wanted me to cooperate. He also wanted just to ensure, by making the statement, and I said it in my testimony, there is no Russia, there is no collusion, there is no deal. He goes, it's all a witch hunt, and he goes, this stuff has to end.
Did you take those comments to be suggestive of what might flavor your testimony?
Sir, he's been saying that to me for many, many months. And at the end of the day, I knew exactly what he wanted me to say.
And why was Mr. Sekulow in the meeting?
Because he was going to be representing Mr. Trump going forward as one of his personal attorneys in this matter.
So it was sort of a handoff meeting.
Correct.
In any way, final question, did the president in any way, from your point of view, coach you in terms of how to respond to questions or the content of your testimony before a House committee?
Again, it's a difficult answer because he doesn't tell you what he wants. What he does is, again, Michael, there's no Russia, there's no collusion, there's no involvement, there's no interference. I know what he means because I've been around him for so long. So if you're asking me whether or not that's the message, that's staying on point, that's the party line that he created,
and this is not unusual. It's almost telepathy type communications. If two people hang around each other long enough, they begin to sense each other's feelings and each other's likes and each other's dislikes. So what he's saying here, I truly can comprehend that maybe not verbally he was coached directly, but indirectly pertaining to the atmosphere that two people, or the chemistry that two people can generate. It almost hinges on telepathy towards each other being able to read each other's mind. That's what I'm getting out of this. Now, to my viewers, you may not get this, what he just said, But that's what I'm getting out of this, that sometimes you don't have to, what is that old saying? The loudest thing that you can say is by not saying it. And sometimes that's real, pertaining to your intelligent level, because you know if your wife has suddenly snarled up her nose whenever you come in that afternoon and there's not no dinner done, you should know that what's going on. What have I done wrong? What have I said? What didn't I do that I should have done? What's going on here? Or vice versa, with the husband not going out here and tending to his chores towards being the breadwinner and tending to the outdoor maintenancing of the yard and the house and stuff. I mean, there's just some things that you just don't have to talk about.
How many others are now touting? Yes, that's the message that he wanted to reinforce.
Gentleman's time is expired,
Thank you.
Mr. Massey.
Mr. Cohen, can you just clarify, did you say that at times you would do what you thought Mr. Trump wanted you to do, not specifically what he told you to do?
At times, yes.
So you just went on your intuition?
I don't know if I would call it intuition as much as I would just say my knowledge of what he wanted, because it happened before and I knew what he had wanted.
Does a lawyer have a duty to provide his client with good legal advice?
Absolutely.
Yes.
Were you a good lawyer to Mr. Trump?
I believe so.
When you arranged a payment to Miss Clifford...
I disagree with that statement. He was a puppet. He was not an attorney. An attorney is someone who studies the laws and knows the laws towards breaking the laws, and he was not a good attorney. He was Mr. Trump's puppet.
You say in your testimony, I'm going to quote from your testimony, that you did so, quote, without bothering to consider whether that was improper, much less whether it was the right thing to do. You said that, unquote. That's your testimony today. You said you didn't even consider whether it was legal. How could you give your client legal advice when you're not even considering whether it's legal?
Because he's a puppet.
I did what I knew Mr. Trump wanted. This conversation with Mr. Trump
I didn't ask whether you were a good fixer. I asked whether you were a good lawyer.
Sometimes you have to melt both together. I needed to, at that time, ensure and protect Mr. Trump. And if I put which I'm clearly suffering the penalty of, I clearly erred on the side of wrong.
So you feel like without bothering to consider whether it was proper, much less whether it was the right thing to do, by ignoring any conscience, if you have one, that you were protecting Mr. Trump.
I'm sorry, sir, I don't understand.
You feel that was how to protect, as his lawyer, you feel that you did a good job. You said you were a good lawyer, right?
That's
Is that
correct.
being a good lawyer? To not even consider whether it's legal or not?
I didn't work for...
My mind keeps reflecting back up onto a commercial where these people are being robbed in this bank, and they make mention about dissecting the problem, but aren't willing to do nothing about the problem. In other words, they're monitors. That's basically, in a sense, what I'm reading here about this, that he was basically a monitor in assessing what Trump wanted and what Trump liked, and he let his emotions of monitoring Trump's feelings trump over his professional legal counsel. That's what I'm getting out of this. To my viewers, they may get something else, but that's the first thing that popped up into my head, is that he was being basically a monitor, kind of like on that commercial where that bank's being robbed and one person looks at the other and says, something to the degree that, oh, we're being robbed or something like that, or maybe I got the commercial wrong. Maybe it's about somebody being sick or something, but it's got something to do with a monitor. That, oh, we can't fix the problem, we're just monitoring the problem. Well, if you're a good attorney, regardless whether you're representing the President of the United States, or you're representing the Queen of England, or you're representing somebody that's ain't got 2 cents in their pocket, you're supposed to acknowledge the dynamics of the law at all times, not just towards being a monitor, but towards being an advisor.
The campaign, I was working and I was trying to protect Mr. Trump. I sat with Mr. Trump, and this goes back all the way to 2011. This wasn't the first scenario with Ms. Daniels.
Let's go back then.
So, my point is, this was an ongoing situation. It didn't just start in October. Sir, please, you have to let me finish.
Well,
it started in October. It didn't start in October.
Let me
it
ask you
started many years earlier.
When were you disbarred?
Yesterday, from what I read in the paper.
Yesterday. When should you have been disbarred? Based on the legal counsel you were giving your client?
I don't have an answer for your question.
How long were you counsel
7 years
for
ago?
Mr. Trump?
6 years
Since
ago?
2007.
When is the first time you gave him bad legal advice or failed to inform him of his legal obligations, as you testified today you did in the case of the payment to Miss Clifford? When was the first time you did that? Would that qualify for disbarment?
I don't know, sir. I'm not the Bar Association.
Sure it would.
I think you should consult with them maybe occasionally on some of these things.
There's no point now. I lost my law license.
Has anybody else promised to pay Mr. Davis for representing you?
No.
Nobody has?
No. Are you offering?
Question, quickly. July, you said, and this is also in your testimony, in the days before the Democratic Convention, you became privy to a conversation that some of Hillary Clinton's emails would be leaked. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. Was that in, you said late July? Do you know the exact day?
I believe it was either the 18th or the 19th, and I would guess that it would be on the 19th.
But it was definitely July.
I believe so, yes.
You know that was public knowledge in June? This was Mr. Assange, and I'd like to submit this, unanimous consent, submit this for the record.
Without objection, so.
Mr. Assange reported to the media on June 12th that those emails would be leaked. So I'm not saying you have fake news, I'm saying you have old news, and there's really not much to that. I would like to yield the remainder of my time to Mr. Higgins.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Cohen, I'm quoting you close I can earlier, said, I spent last week looking through boxes to find documents that would support your accusation. Where are those boxes, good sir? Where are those boxes? Are they in your garage or?
They're in the storage.
And are these not boxes that should have been turned over to investigative authorities during the many criminal investigations you've been subject to?
Sir, these are the boxes that were returned to me
If they include data pertinent to crimes that you've committed, should they not have been turned over and remanded to investigative authority? Did Mr. Lanny Davis know of these boxes?
The gentleman's time has expired. You may answer the question.
I don't understand his question, sir.
Very well. Christian Morley.
Mr. Cohen. Good morning. Thank you, Chairman Cummings, for convening this hearing, and thank you, Mr. Cohen, for voluntarily testifying this morning. Mr. Cohen, you were the Executive Vice President and Special Counsel for the Trump Organization, correct?
I was the Executive Vice President, Special Counsel for Donald J. Trump.
And Special Counsel means you were the attorney for him, is that right?
Just means I was there in order to handle matters that he felt were significant and important to him individually.
And those included legal matters?
Yes, sir.
Sir, as a former attorney, you're familiar with legal documents known as non-disclosure agreements, or NDAs, is that right?
Yes.
Sir, I'm sure you know that NDAs, properly written in scope, can be reasonable in certain business contexts, but they can also be abused to create a chilling effect to silence people, as we've seen in the Me Too movement and and other places. Isn't that right, Mr. Cohen?
Yes.
And Mr. Cohen, the Trump organization used NDAs extensively. Isn't that right?
That's correct.
Mr. Cohen, I'm reading from a recent Washington Post article regarding the language in one of these types of NDAs where the terms were described as very broad. For instance, the terms confidential information was defined to be anything that, quote, Mr. Trump insists remain private or confidential, including but not limited to any information with respect to the personal life, political affairs, and or business affairs of Mr. Trump or any family member, close quote. Do those terms sound familiar to you?
I've seen that document.
In fact, there's a class action lawsuit filed this month by former Trump campaign worker Jessica Denson that this NDA language is illegal because it is too broad, too vague, and would be used to retaliate against employees who complain of illegality or wrongdoing. Would you agree that in the use of these types of NDAs with this type of language, and later when Donald Trump sought to enforce them, that he intended to prevent people from coming forward with claims of wrongdoing?
Yes.
Would you agree that the effect of the use of these NDAs and their enforcement was to have a chilling effect on people or silence them from coming forward?
I apologize. If you want to define chilling, I'm not sure.
Oh, just that he would, in using these NDAs or trying to enforce them, would basically try to keep people silent.
That was the goal.
And nothing at the Trump organization was ever done unless it was run through President Donald Trump, correct?
That's 100% certain.
Okay. Mr. Cohen, do you believe that there are people out there today, either from the president's business or personal life, who are not coming forward to tell their stories of wrongdoing because of the president's use of NDAs against them?
I'm sorry, sir. I don't know the answer to that question.
Okay. Sir, I have a couple other questions for you. When was the last communication with President Trump or someone acting on his behalf?
I don't have the specific date, but it was a while ago.
Okay. Do you have a general time frame?
I would suspect it was within 2 months post the raid of my my home.
Okay, so
hotel.
Early fall of last year, generally.
Generally.
And what did he or his agent communicate to you?
Unfortunately, this topic is actually something that's being investigated right now by the Southern District of New York, and I've been asked by them not to discuss and not to talk about these issues.
Fair enough. Is there any other wrongdoing or illegal act that you are aware of regarding Donald Trump that we haven't yet?
He's been asked not to talk about these issues, but yet now this is supposed to be a free, fair hearing or trial. That statement right there just knocked free and fair in the head. Because if he's been advised not to comment on certain issues pertaining to this case, it's cherry picking to the general public towards what we're supposed to hear and not hear in regard to the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth. So help us God.
New York.
Sir, Congressman Cooper asked you about whether you were aware of any physical violence committed by President Trump. I just have a couple quick questions. Do you have any knowledge of President Trump abusing any controlled substances?
I'm not aware of that, no.
Do you have any knowledge of President Trump being delinquent on any alimony or child care payments?
I'm not aware of any of that.
Do you have any knowledge of President Trump arranging any health care procedures for any women not in his family?
I'm not aware of that, no.
Thank you. I yield back.
Thank you.
Mr. Cloud.
Thank you, Chairman. Mr. Cohen, can you tell me the significance of May 6th?
After May 5th.
In terms
26th.
of, sir?
A couple months from now.
That's the day that I need to surrender
Yes,
to
sir.
federal prison.
Could you, for the record, state what you've been convicted of?
I've been convicted on 5 counts of tax evasion. There's 1 count of misrepresentation of documents to a bank. There's 2 counts, one dealing with campaign finance for Karen McDougal, 1 count of campaign finance violation for Stormy Daniels, as well as lying to Congress.
Thank you. Can you state what your official title with the campaign was?
I did not have a campaign title.
And your position in the Trump administration?
I did not have one.
Okay, in today's testimony, you said that you were not looking to work in the White House. The Southern District of New York, in their statement, their sentencing memo, says this: Cohen's criminal violations in the federal election laws were also stirred, like others' crimes, by his own ambition and greed. Cohen privately told friends, colleagues, and including seized text messages that he expected to be given a prominent role in the new administration. When that did not materialize, Cohen found a way to monetize his relationship and access with the president. So, were they lying or were you lying today?
I'm not saying it's a lie. I'm just saying it's not accurate. I did not want to go to the White House. I retained, and I brought an attorney in, and I sat with Mr. Trump, with him, for well over an hour, explaining the importance of having a personal attorney, that every president has had one, in order to handle matters like the matters I was dealing with, which included, say, like Summer Zervos, Stormy Daniels, dealing with Stephanie Clifford, and other personal matters that needed.
Memo. Excuse me, this is my time. Thank you. Ask unanimous consent to submit the sentencing memo from the Southern District of New York for the record.
Without objection, so ordered.
All right, I'll get that to you in a second. Okay, this memo states that you committed 4 distinct federal crimes over a period of several years. You were motivated to do so by personal greed and repeatedly used your power to influence for deceptive ends. It goes on to say that that they each they were distinct in their harms, but bear a common set of characteristics, that they involved deception and were each motivated by personal greed and ambition. There's a lot we don't know in regards to this investigation, but here's what we do know. We know that you were expecting a job at the White House and didn't get it. You made millions lying about your close access to the president. You have a history of lying for personal gain, including that's banks, about your accountant, to law enforcement, your family, the Congress, the American people. The Southern District of New York, you've said that you did all this out of blind loyalty to Mr. Trump, but your sentencing memo states this: this was not an act out of blind loyalty, as Cohen suggests. Cohen was driven by a desire to further ingratiate himself with a potential future president for whose political success Cohen himself claimed credit for. Now, we're in a search for truth, and I don't know, Chairman, how we're supposed to ascertain the truth in this quagmire of a hearing when the best witness we can bring before this has already been convicted of lying before us. And what's sad is the American people have seen this play out before. We have people in prominent positions fail, and then a couple years later they get a book deal. Now you're set to go to jail for a couple years. You come out with a multi-million book deal. That's not bad living. And so my question is will you today to commit to donate any further proceeds to book deals, to film reviews, to charity?
No.
Thank you. I yield my time. Will the gentleman yield?
No.
Will the gentleman yield?
Now, may I?
That just spoke volumes pertaining to his character. His answer was no. In other words, he's still the same greedy, selfish person.
May I finish?
With the gentleman
yield to Mr. Meadows.
Mr. Chairman, may I finish?
Mr. Cohen.
May I finish?
Mr. Cohen, he's yielded to me, and so
I didn't finish, sir, my response.
Listen, everything's been made.
Mr. Chairman, may I finish my response, please?
I'll let you respond, but let's answer his question, please.
Mr. Cohen, everything's been made of your lies in the past. I'm concerned about your lies today. Under your testimony just a few minutes ago, to me, You indicated that you had contracts with foreign entities. And yet we have a truth and testimony disclosure form, which requires you to list those foreign contracts for the last 2 years, and you put NA on there. And it's a criminal offense to not have that accurately. So when were you lying? Either in the testimony to me earlier today or when you filled out the form?
Right. Gentleman's time has expired. Mr. Cohen, you may answer his question and then whatever you want to say on that.
His questions, unfortunately, I don't have an answer for his question. But as
well, no, Mr. Chairman.
As it relates,
the gentleman is out of order. He said he does not have an answer.
Mr. Chairman, when we were in the majority, with all due respect, Mr. Chairman, hold on.
Regular order. The gentleman has just said he doesn't have an answer, and you had gone on over your time.
He's under oath to tell the truth. One of them is not accurate, Mr. Chairman.
You won't have time to answer the question.
Chairman, just a question, Mr. Chairman, just a question.
Mr. Raskin. Mr. Raskin.
Mr. Cohen, thank you for your composure today. Our colleagues are not upset because you lied to Congress for the president. They're upset because you stopped lying to Congress for the president. Now, you've described the Trump campaign as a once-in-a-lifetime money-making opportunity, the greatest infomercial of all time, I think you said. And this may be the most trenchant observation of your whole testimony. Do you think the Trump campaign or presidency ever stopped being about making money for the president, his family, and his organization?
yes,
When did it stop being that?
when he won the election.
And what did it become about at that point?
Then it had to be about figuring out what to do here in Washington.
Can you carefully explain to America how the hush money payments to Karen McDougal and Stormy Daniels worked? Can you carefully explain what catch and kill is?
Sure. I received a phone call regarding both Karen McDougal as well as Stormy Daniels, obviously at different times, stating that there were issues that were going to be damaging to Mr. Trump. With the Stormy Daniels, it started in 2011 when she wanted to have something removed from a website. And that was the first time I met Keith David. I spoke with Keith Davidson, her then acting attorney, and we were successful in having it taken down from the website. It wasn't until years later, by around the time of the campaign, did they come back and they ask, what are you going to do now, because she's back on the trail trying to sell the story. At which point in time, David Pecker, on behalf of the National Enquirer, reached out to her and her attorney in order to go take a look at lie detector test that would prove that she was telling the truth. They then contacted me and told me that she was telling the truth, at which point, again, all the time.
She took a lie detector test.
Allegedly took a lie detector test and was seen by an employee of the National Enquirer. At which point in time, I went straight into Mr. Trump's office and I explained why this time it's different than another time.
Okay, now when you say different than another time, were there other women paid sexual hush money by Donald Trump or his organization? Was this a standard operating practice?
No.
So you're not aware of any other cases where it had taken place?
I'm not aware of any other case that Mr. Trump paid. So which brings us to the Karen McDougal. He was supposed to pay. He was supposed to pay $125,000 for the life story of Karen McDougal. For whatever the reason may be, he elected not to pay it. David Pecker was very angry because there was also other monies that David had expended on his behalf. Unfortunately, David never got paid back for that either.
So David Pecker had done this in other cases of other mistresses or women?
Other circumstances, yes.
Okay.
Not all of them had to do with women.
Are you aware of anything that the president has done at home or abroad that may have subjected him to or may subject him to extortion or blackmail?
I am not, no.
Okay. Are you aware of any videotapes that may be the subject of extortion or blackmail?
I've heard about these tapes for a long time. I've had many people contact me over the years. I have no reason to believe that that tape exists.
In December 2015, Donald Trump was asked about his relationship with Felix Sater, a convicted felon and real estate developer, and he replied, "Felix Sater, boy, have to even think about it. I'm not that familiar with him." Why did Trump endeavor to hide his relationship with Felix Sater, and what was his relationship?
Well, he certainly had a relationship. Felix was a partner in a company called Bayrock that was involved in the deal of the Trump Soho Hotel, as well as, I believe, the Trump Fort Lauderdale project. Why did he want to distance himself? That's what Mr. Trump does. He distances himself when things go bad for someone. And at that point in time, it was going bad for Mr. Sater.
You said you lied to Congress about Trump's negotiations to build his Moscow tower because he made it clear to you that he wanted you to lie. One of the reasons you knew this is because, quote, Mr. Trump's personal lawyers reviewed and edited my statement to Congress about the timing of the Moscow tower negotiations before I gave it. So this is a pretty breathtaking claim, and I just want to get to the facts here. Which specific lawyers reviewed and edited your statement to Congress on the Moscow tower negotiations, and did they make any changes to your statement?
There were changes made, additions. Jay Sekulow, for one.
Were there changes about the timing? The question of...
Gentleman's time has expired. You may answer that question.
There were several changes that were made, including how we were going to handle that message.
Mr.
Which was...
were you finished?
Yes, so the message, of course, being the length of time that the Trump Tower Moscow project stayed and remained alive.
That was one of the changes.
Yes.
Mr. Grothman.
Yeah, first of all, I'd like to clear up something, just a little something that bothers me. You started off your testimony and you said, I think in response to some question, that President Trump never expected to win. I just want to clarify that I dealt with President Trump several times as he was trying to get Wisconsin. He was always confident. He was working very hard. And this idea that somehow he was just running to raise his profile for some future adventure, at least in my experience, is preposterous. And I always I'll find it offensive when anti-Trump people imply that he just did this on a lark and didn't expect to win. But be that as it may, my first question concerns your relationship with the court. Do you expect, right now I think you're sentenced to 3 years, correct?
That's correct.
Do you expect any time using this testimony, other testimony, after you get done doing whatever you're going to do this week, do you ever expect to go back and ask for any sort of reduction in sentence?
Yes, there are ongoing investigations currently being conducted that have nothing to do with this committee or Congress that I am assisting in, and it is for the benefit of a Rule 35 motion, yes.
So you expect, and perhaps what you testify here today will affect, going back and reducing this, what we think is a relatively light 3-year sentence. You expect to go back and ask for a further reduction?
Based off of my appearance here today?
Well, based upon whatever you do between now and your request for...
The Rule 35 motion is in the complete hands of the Southern District of New York. And the way the Rule 35 motion works is what you're supposed to do is provide them with information that leads to ongoing investigations. I am currently working with them right now on several other issues of investigation that concerns them that they're looking at. If those investigations become fruitful, then there is a possibility for a Rule 35 motion. And I don't know what the benefit in terms of time would be, but this congressional hearing today is not going to be the basis of a Rule 35 motion. I wish it was, but it's not.
I'd like to yield some time to Congressman Jordan.
I yield to the gentleman from North Carolina.
Mr. Cohen, I'm going to come back to the question I asked before with regards to your false statement that you submitted to Congress. On here, it was very clear that it asked for contracts with foreign entities over the last 2 years. Have you had any foreign contract with foreign entities, whether it's Navaris or the Korean Airline or Kazakhstan BTA Bank? Your testimony earlier said that you had contracts with them. In fact, you went into detail.
I believe it talks about lobbying. I did no lobbying. On top of that,
in your
they are
testimony,
not government.
I'm not asking about lobbying, Mr. Cohen.
They are not government agencies.
Do you have foreign
publicly
contracts?
traded companies?
Do you have foreign contracts?
I currently have no foreign.
Did you have foreign contracts over the last 2 years?
Foreign contracts?
Contracts with foreign entities. Did you have
Yes.
contracts? Yes.
Yes.
Why didn't you put them on the form? It says it's a criminal offense to not put them on this form for the last 2 years. Why did you not do that?
Because those foreign companies that you're referring to are not government companies.
It says non-governmental, Mr. Cohen. You signed it.
They're talking about me as being non-governmental.
No, and right, it says foreign agency. It says foreign contracts. Do you want us to read it to you?
I read it, and it was reviewed by my counsel, and I am a non-government employee. It was not lobbying, and they are not
This
foreign.
has nothing to do with lobbying. It says it's a criminal offense to not list all your foreign contracts. That's what it says.
What a
I'm gonna
weasel.
take a look at it before I leave.
No, you've heard it.
I will, and hopefully I will amend it prior to leaving, because that's not the way I read your document.
You know, it's just one more example, Mr. Cohen, of you skirting the truth. Okay,
Weasel.
I'll ask one other question. One other question, Mr. Cohen. Is
He's
my
squirrely,
time.
boy.
Were you advised, or was your counsel advised, to withhold your written testimony to the latest possible date, as John Dean said last night on CNN?
Was it my what?
Were you advised, or was your counsel advised, to withhold your written testimony to this committee at the latest possible date, to get it to this committee at the latest possible date, as John Dean said that he advised you? Yes or no?
No. We will.
He never advised you.
We will, John Dean? I've never spoken with John Dean.
Has he spoken to your attorney?
I don't know. I've never spoken
Well,
to
ask
John
your
Dean.
attorney. He's right
we
there
were
behind
working
you.
last night till 11, 12 o'clock at
You've
night.
known that you've been coming for some time.
May answer the question. Answer the question.
We were working till 11, 12 o'clock last night to finish everything.
So you were writing it last night, Mr. Cohen?
we were
Don't
making
give me
edits.
that bull.
We were making edits all the way through the night.
Recognize Mr. Rudak.
I'm sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Cohen, in November 2013, President Donald Trump testified under oath in a lawsuit related to the failed real estate project, Trump International Hotel and Tower in Fort Lauderdale. During the deposition, President Trump was asked about his knowledge of Felix Sater, a Russian-born real estate developer and convicted member of the Russian mafia, who, according to press reports, pled guilty for his role in a $40 million stock manipulation scheme. And it's worth noting, as well publicized, the direct relationship between the Russian mafia and the Kremlin. Over the years, President Trump was asked how many times he interacted with convicted Russian mobster Felix Sater. In 2013, President Trump testified that, quote, "Not many. If he were sitting in the room right now, I really wouldn't know what he looked like," unquote. Mr. Cohen, as you previously testified, isn't it true that President Trump knew convicted Russian mobster Felix Sater in 2013 when he made that statement?
Yes.
Isn't it true that because of Mr. Sater's relationship to the Trump organization, that he had an office in the Trump Tower?
And on the 26th floor, Mr. Trump.
And the 26th floor is important. Why?
Because it's Mr. Trump's floor.
So he had an office on the same floor as President Trump.
In fact, his office, when he left, became my office.
And isn't it also true that convicted Russian mobster Sater even had business cards indicating that he was a senior advisor to Donald Trump, as reported by the Washington Post?
Yes.
Did convicted Russian mobster Sater pay rent for his office?
No, he did not.
So, based on those facts, isn't it true that President Trump misled at best, or worse, lied under oath?
Yes.
In December 2015, President Trump was asked again about his relationship to convicted Russian mobster Mr. Sater by a reporter for the Associated Press. He stated, quote, "Felix Sater, boy, I have to even think about it," unquote. He added, quote, "I'm not that familiar with him," unquote. Mr. Cohen, where would we find business records that explain the president's relationship to the convicted Russian mobster Felix Sater? Would those be in the Trump organization's files?
They'd be in the Trump organization's files. There would be CCs to Bayrock, which was the name of Mr. Sater's company. I suspect on Mr. Sater's email address, possibly hard files in possession of Mr. Sater.
And when you say in possession of the Trump organization, where?
It depends upon who the attorney was that was working on it. Now it would probably be in a box, off-site. They have storage facility that they put old files.
In addition to convicted Russian mobster Sater, do you know of any other ties to convicted or alleged mobsters President Trump may have?
I am not aware.
Is it true that many people with ties to Russia ultimately bought condos and Trump properties, usually for cash? And if so, how many are we talking? 10, 20, 50?
I'm not, honestly, sir, I'm not aware of any. The statement that you're referring to, I believe, was made by either Eric or Don, and I don't agree with it.
So are you aware of any cash purchases by Russian oligarchs and family members of Trump properties?
I'm not aware of that. I can tell you when you say cash, if you mean walking in with a satchel of rubles, the answer is I've never seen that happen. I've never heard of it. I will tell you when we sold Mr. Trump's property in Palm Beach, the home for $95 million, it came in by wire. And that came from Mr. Ruboliev's bank account.
One other question. You also talked about President Trump doing negotiations throughout the campaign regarding the Trump Tower in Moscow. Was he directly involved in those negotiations? And if so, how do you know?
Well, the answer is yes. And as it relates to negotiations, it was merely follow-ups as to what's currently happening, what's happening with Russia, meaning he wanted me to give him a status report. The problem with this is that the project never advanced because they were unable, Mr. Sater was unable to provide me with proof that somebody owned or controlled a piece of property that we can actually build on.
Gentleman's time has expired, Mr. Marsh.
Mr. Cohen, why did Mr. Trump choose to hire you, and why did he trust you with the various tasks that you performed for him?
I don't know, sir. You would have to ask him that question.
Well, we've heard here that you have bad character. You've admitted to that over the years. You have no idea why he chose to hire you.
In 2006, I was asked by Don Jr. to come meet with his father. I did. He then followed up by asking if I would take a look at an issue that was occurring at Trump World Tower with the board. I went ahead and I looked into it, and I found that the statements that the board were making about Mr. Trump were inaccurate. And the reason Don came to me is because I had an apartment there for investment. My parents had an apartment there. My in-laws lived there. Friends of mine, we all bought as a big block from a brokerage company. We got a good price on each unit. And we ultimately turned over the board, and I became actually the treasurer of the board because the out-of-control spending was going to put the building into bankruptcy. And I was proud to say that within a year, we had plus $1 million versus minus 1.3.
I want to weigh in right here, and I'm going to end this pertaining to my viewers. But this is a personal comment that I'm going to make in regard to this hearing. Sometimes when you look at something, you have to look deep and dark into one's motives of what he or she is saying and doing, and the purpose and behind what they are doing. I have made reference to this before, and I'll make reference to it again. If various political practices in the past 30, 40 years was exhilarated to the point of being openly practiced during the beginning phases of our infancy of this country, we would have run into a dilemma way, way before now as far as being $20 trillion in debt. And to be quite honest with you, we probably wouldn't have a country. Not under the guidelines of what we do now, not under the Constitution that we do now. Our forefathers, a great deal of them, whenever they went into office, was literally almost just as broke whenever they left office, regardless whether they served a 2-year, 4-year, or 8-year, and some even a 12-year term. Some of them was just as broke the day that they left as they was the day that they went in, based around their salary and based around them doing their jobs for the American people. Today, these politicians that get involved in these affairs are in it for themselves versus in it for the people. And it's really, really sad, because if this would have been conducted in the infancy stages of this country, it would have been looked upon as treason, and people would have been ushered out to the wall, and they would have been executed immediately. High treason even goes beyond anything imaginable pertaining to treasonable acts, regardless whether it's coming from Mr. Trump's attorney, Mr. Trump's administration, or Mr. Trump himself. That's on a completely different, whole different perspective as far as people doing wrong versus people doing wrong as far as high treason. I personally think that regardless whether it's being done directly or indirectly, a lot of times these politicians will purposely plan out towards bringing hardship to society. Because as people are failing in their loans, they're failing in making their payments on their cars, they're failing in keeping their commitments with various banking institutions. You got others, such as these politics that are basically nothing more than ticks, that latch on to people's miseries and people's unfortunate adventures that come out like a rose. And this not only, the rule of law not only works this way in a county setting, of a state setting, but also a federal setting. And I tend to wonder if it hasn't been purposely inserted towards sabotaging the system to the point that if you are poor, you're going to remain poor. Regardless of how good of a job that you may have, because the way that the system is set up towards having to be out all this money, towards paying for the interest on the car, the interest on the loan, the interest on your school, or as far as your education, the interest on your home, the way that the system is set up, inevitably the working class, the mid class, the poor class are going to remain poor. I'm not going to get into the dynamics of any of this because I haven't been here the whole time in studying it. I've got other occurrences to be involved in other than being involved in travesty type scenarios. But I do want to make this final comment that whenever it reaches the point that all we have is corruption, 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 regardless whether it's political corruption or church spiritual corruption, either on a federal, state, or local level. This country is substance of seeing the wrath and retribution coming from the heavens that will not only penalize and punish the guilty, but it will punish and penalize the innocent, because the innocent did not have the fortitude, they did not have the zeal, they did not have the backbone, they did not have the guts to call these people on the carpet towards stopping this type of corruption to begin with. It's really, really sad in 2019, as we're venturing off into the 21st century, towards seeing all these hardships that has fallen upon to the tax-paying people by putting people in charge and in powerful positions towards thinking that they was going to be honest, good, decent, working by the rule of law people, and basically just went in there for themselves and once more raked the cream off the top and fattened their own pockets and fattened their own lives. Just like this guy here, he's going to have 2 years to sit in a cell, which will probably be a nice prison system, maybe somewhere out in Denver, Colorado, with a tennis court and a swimming pool and maybe even a golf range, looking at a big, nice mountain view somewhere, scheduled, no violent type behavior from any of the inmates, basically be treated like a king. I don't know if he'll have access to a telephone or a computer or not, but who's to say that he won't just take on his home business in his jail cell, and while he's in there, it gives him time to concentrate and to manipulate his words so that he can produce this big book that that'll wind up bringing him in another $150-200 million of how that he has distorted and extorted the American people's tax-paying funds. It's sad. It's really sad. We're at a point right now where the Christian society needs to pray like they've never prayed before for this country and for the people that's in charge. Shalom. We went a long way, old friend, in regard to what used to be considered right and what is now considered wrong. But one thing about the Native American red man, whenever he spoke of the European man, the white man, that speaketh with forked tongue, those words should be chiseled in gold somewhere on a monument of the truth that has come from the Native Americans. To see the mess that these people have created for all of us goes beyond anything comprehensible that I think that I have ever experienced or seen in my entire life. And to forfeit the future of the good people, especially our children and our children's children, because of this type of greed, because of this type of corruption, goes beyond anything that I can even begin to comprehend or understand. Why that the American people has set back so long in being lax and allowing for this to evolve and escalate the way that it has. We went a long way, old friend.